patience is running out. Moscow warns the West against pushing further. This comes as Ukraine faces relentless attacks and the U.S. ramps up its military support for Kyiv. The missile barrage on Ukraine has left 1 million people without electricity. Is the war escalating? Our next report brings you the latest from the battlefield.
Russian forces unleashed a massive assault on Ukraine. Missiles and drones rained down on Kyiv, Kharkiv and Odessa. Temperatures plunge and emergency power outages leave millions in the cold. In Kyiv, residents, some holding small babies, seek refuge in metro stations as explosions rock the city.
Our mornings begin with checking the phone to see if there is an air alert. I have to take the eldest daughter to school. We saw that there was an air alert and went to the metro. What do we think about all this? We are indeed fed up with all of it.
The overnight strikes cripple Ukraine's already fragile infrastructure, adding new misery to the war-torn nation. Kyiv says it will continue to mount more assaults. Ukraine's recent strikes on Russian border regions using American and British missiles have further escalated tensions.
The recent authorization for long-range strikes on military facilities in Russia helped, but the pressure on Russia must be maintained and increased at different levels so that Russia feels what war is.
Backed by US permission to strike Russian territory, these attacks have enraged Moscow, leading to threats of severe retaliation. Russia responds with mounting fury, warning that its tolerance for Western interference has reached a breaking point. Moscow calls the firing of Western weapons as provocative.
Every wave of escalation from the West is going to be decisively responded to. I will be frank, we believe that it is our right to use our weapons against military facilities of those countries who allow the use of weapons against our facilities.
President Biden is rushing additional aid to Kyiv. The US has already sent over $56 billion in military support since 2022. More funding is on the way as Biden's administration aims to arm Ukraine with what it needs to hold off Russian advances. Washington is now pushing Kyiv to do more. The White House is urging Ukraine to bolster its troop levels, calling for the mobilization of 18-year-olds. Officials argue Ukraine must increase its manpower if it hopes to sustain its fight against Russia's superior forces. Experts say the Biden administration's strategy is fraught with risk, potentially pushing the conflict into an even more dangerous escalatory cycle. With Biden running out of time to make lasting decisions before his term ends, the stakes have never been higher. Ukraine is battered but determined, while Russia continues to strengthen its position on the battlefield.
From Berlin, we are now joined by Ben Aries, founder and editor-in-chief of BNE IntelliNews and also former Moscow bureau chief for the Daily Telegraph. Thank you so much for joining us on WION and welcome back. Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov, referring to these airstrikes against Russian territory, says our patience will not be long. What message is Moscow trying to send to the West at this point?
It's saying that the West is escalating and that Russia will respond in kind. I mean, what's going on at the moment is that the US, the Biden administration, is surging all its supplies. It has a bunch of money, some $6 billion that it hasn't spent, and that it's buying and sending as much arms and weapons as it can before Biden has to give up office in January. And at the same time, Biden's crossed another red line. I mean, he seems to be rushing across them at the moment by giving Zelensky's long asked for permission to use these powerful cruise and ballistic missiles supplied by the West on targets inside Russia. This is an attack using NATO weapons on Russian territory. And the Kremlin has responded by saying, look, we consider that NATO's direct participation in the war in Ukraine. Their point being is that these sophisticated missiles, the Shadow Storm and the ATACMS, they need Western satellites in order to navigate, and that has to be done by NATO operatives. They have to be controlled ultimately by NATO officers, because Ukrainians don't have those satellites, don't have those skills. And so the Russians are taking this as all as a serious escalation. And so, as I say, Lavrov is just trying to draw another line here, is saying, look, our patience is wearing thin. We've accepted you crossing these lines. We accepted the Ukrainian incursion into Russia, the first since Second World War with the Kursk operation. But our patience will run out at some point. And they answered that very definitively by firing this new Oreshnik ICBM at Ukraine, a weapon that has a range of 5,000 kilometers and can hit any capital in Western Europe, and is also capable of carrying nuclear warheads.
And despite all of this, Ukraine continues to urge the West to pile on more pressure against Russia after missile strikes have further crippled the country's energy infrastructures. Now we have about 1 million Ukrainians without power. How do you see things moving forward from here?
Well, it's the same story, isn't it? I mean, this barrage that we've seen in the last 24 hours targeting more energy infrastructure as, temperatures go sub-zero in the Ukraine is Russia's immediate response to this surge of American aid and arms. And there was a move in August where the Ukrainian and Russian sides were proposing to have initial peace or ceasefire talks to stop targeting those energy facilities, because you have to understand how cold it gets in Ukraine in the winter, that the apartments will become unlivable if they are completely cut off from power and heating. But those talks came to nothing, and Russia's making the point by going in the other direction and hitting even harder the energy sector, half of which is already being destroyed. For the Ukrainian side, Zelensky's in a desperate position. It's not widely reported, but the defenses in the Donbass are collapsing. That Reuters just reported this morning that Russians have taken back the most territory in a single week than they've taken since the start of the war in 2022. They took back some 240 kilometers in a week, whereas previously in the summer, in the stalemate, the Ukrainians or the Russians were making single kilometer gains or 10-kilometer gains in a week. And so Zelensky's desperate. I mean, he's welcomed all this surge from the US, but he needs a whole lot more. He needs fighter jets, tanks, and he's hoping that Trump's going to provide them. But I don't know, the conventional wisdom is, or the consensus is, that Trump's going to cut Ukraine off completely as soon as he takes office in January.
Yeah, what a story to watch. And we see, as you mentioned, President Biden thinking of only escalation at this point with less than 2 months left. Ben, it's always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for coming on.
My pleasure.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.